The images of ghost towns conjures up visions of empty, dirt-covered streets and deserted buildings, and perhaps the spiritual remains of the residents who once lived there. We've been conditioned to this notion by scenes from Western movies and tales of the Old West, much of which ends up to be more legend than actual accounts of history. While most of the legends have been embellished over the years, there remains a curiosity that much of it may be true. Oregon is rich in history and legend, from the early gold seekers in the East, West, and South to lumbering and agriculture in other parts of the state. Join us as we take you through Oregon on a journey through time. If it wasn't for the tourists and popular flea markets and 4th of July celebration, Sumter may look like many of Oregon's ghost towns. Guess you could call Sumter a living ghost town, a town that refused to die when the gold panned out. The town had a population of more than 4,000 at its peak in late 1903. Just off Highway 7, 30 miles from Baker City, Sumter was the center of the Eastern Oregon gold fields, yielding more than $9 million of the precious metal from several mines, over $1 billion in today's dollars. In its glory, Sumter was a bustling community complete with electric lights, a brickyard, hospital, 16 saloons, 5 hotels, 2 banks, and even a red light district. The main attraction today, and even in its early years, is the Sumter Valley Dredge. More than 50 feet wide and 120 feet long, the rock and gravel guzzling machine took over $4.5 million from the valley floor. The dredge was the last big effort for mining, beginning in 1935 to 1942, and again from 1945 to 54. The dredge still sits on the pond it created. Quiet and lonely now, its machinery is rusting away. The narrow-gauge tracks of the Sumter Valley Railroad had much to do with making the region profitable, carrying ore to the smelter from neighboring mines and lumber to Sumter and Baker City. Today, the restored railway carries tourists along its 7-mile round-trip run from McEwen to Sumter, operating on weekends and holidays. The town never fully recovered from the devastating fire of August 13th, 1917. The blaze started at the Capitol Hotel and completely destroyed 12 city blocks. Dynamite was used to blow up buildings and create fire breaks. Most homes, however, survived the fiery rampage. The name Sumter, they say, comes from Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The spelling had to be changed because postal authorities said it was too confusing to have two towns named the same. But others claimed the town was named after a type of mule called Sumter. In any case, Sumter with a P is the name on the Baker County tax rolls. Sitting alongside State Highway 7 between Austin and McEwen is a town named Whitney. The remaining buildings are deteriorating from the harsh winters and neglect. Whitney was in the center of the gold mining towns, but never much gold was found. It was the terminus of the narrow-gauge Sumter Valley Railroad. 14 rail crews were stationed here. Miners from the gold fields wintered here, and at times the population came close to 200, but never more. Lumber and the railroad is what kept Whitney going. Rail spurs spread out in all directions, bringing logs to the mill. A train trestle over a deep canyon between Sumter and Whitney is said to have been the second highest in the world, but it became too shaky and was removed in 1950. The mill burned to the ground in 1918, but was rebuilt in 1938 and enjoyed 5 years of prosperity until the timber supply dried up. Not much happened in Whitney during the winter, which can be extremely severe. It said the temperature dipped to a bone-chilling 55 degrees below zero during the winter of 1919. Although Whitney was a lumber town, it did have its share of rowdies, and a few of the residents, as the result of gunfights, left town in pine boxes, another byproduct of the Whitney Mill. Traveling from Baker City, 24 miles west on Highway 7, you hardly notice the remains of McEwen. This town once served as the terminus for lumber, livestock, and gold being shipped to the smelter in Sumter. The town included a saloon, stables, a store, and housing for railroad crews. Much of the town was washed away when the Sumter dredge turned the valley floor into piles of tailings. The present Sumter Valley Railroad terminus is the only remaining activity in town. Granite is an easy ghost town to get to. Drive through Sumter on the paved highway for about 15 miles. Granite is one of those towns that boomed during the gold rush, died when the gold was exhausted, and was born again many years later. Many people call Granite home, but they are preserving the town history and many of its historic buildings. Even those that are occupied carry a sign of previous owners from the gold mining days. Gold was discovered on Granite Creek on July 4, 1862. The hillsides were abuzz with mining activity. In 1900, 2 gold nuggets worth $500 and $1,800 were dug from a spring in town. The town was incorporated in 1899. There were a couple of hotels, boarding houses, dance hall, 4 saloons, stores, and a red light district. It's said several children almost lost their lives in a house fire. They say onlookers refused to enter the burning building, although they could hear the screams of the children trapped inside. It was Madame Rose who saw the fire, ran into the building, and rescued the children. She was severely burned and died a short time later. Regardless of her heroic actions, the townspeople refused to allow her burial in the town cemetery. Some of her former patrons dug a grave outside the cemetery gates, partied into the night, and occasionally falling into the open grave. The once City Hall Combination School has been restored and is currently the City Hall. By 1954, one resident remained, Otis Ford. He took on the job of mayor, town council, and treasurer. His cabin remains barely disturbed from its appearance of more than a half-century ago. Otis and his family are buried in the town cemetery. Some of Granite's buildings have received facelifts over the years. But the ambience of a once thriving Eastern Oregon gold mining town still remains. Oregon's smallest and highest incorporated town is Greenhorn, at 6,200 feet above sea level in the Blue Mountains. At the height of the mining boom, 500 people lived here, and another 2,000 miners lived by at neighboring mining camps. Greenhorn was once a busy place, with many of the amenities of a much larger town, including 2 hotels, livery stables, blacksmith shops, city hall, and jail. The jail was moved to Canyon City, where it is now on display as part of the Grant County Museum in Canyon City. Like many ghost towns, a story usually accompanies the origin of the town name, and so it is with Greenhorn. It's said 2 inexperienced young men, obviously greenhorns to the business of mining, were looking for their fortune in the gold fields. They stopped in the saloon and asked the locals to direct them to a likely place to find gold. The residents, with tongue-in-cheek, pointed to a distant hillside and explained, "That's a good place to start." Well, off they went, only to return sometime later with a chunk of rock richer than anything yet discovered in the area. They filed their claim, but the local pranksters had already given it the name of the Greenhorn Mine. The Greenhorn Mine operated until 1925, but the declining price for gold spelled doom, and the town slowly died. Austin, along Highway 7 between Bates and McCune, was primarily a depot for the surrounding mining towns. Not more than 500 people lived here at any one time. The hotel and way station, an elaborate structure in its day, was the focal point of the community. A portion of it still stands today. It was owned and operated by Mr. and Mrs. Minot Austin, the town's namesake. The town had 3 sawmills and several professional offices for doctors and lawyers, and others involved in the mining and lumbering businesses. Not far from the Idaho border and 15 miles north of Halfway, Oregon, is Cornucopia. Gold was discovered here in 1884. Old-timers say the ore was so rich large nuggets would fall from the rocks. More than 16 mines produced more than 300,000 ounces of gold, ending in 1943. Cornucopia is the Latin word for horn of plenty, but miners named the town Cornucopia after Cornucopia, Nevada. A few newer cabins have been built among the ruins of the once thriving mining town, but many of the town's old remnants still remain. Rusting machinery litters the hillside. And the tailings from placer mining are piled along the creek banks. Harsh winters have taken their toll on many of the town's buildings. At 4,700 feet elevation, snow can get up to 15 feet deep. Several big booms occurred from 1884 to 1886. Early Cornucopia had several saloons, a store, and 2 restaurants. It was an orderly town, as mining towns go, with only a few shootings and killings. More than 30 miles of tunnels are scattered throughout the adjoining mountains, and over 6,000 feet of shafts, some of the longest in the U.S. The mining company bunkhouse remains, along with numerous other structures. Just down Highway 395 in eastern Oregon, a short distance from John Day, is Canyon City, and well worth the visit. A block away from the main highway is the old Canyon City settlement, beautifully restored. Canyon Creek, a short distance away, was the site of a major gold discovery in 1862. They say 8 million in gold was taken from the site. At peak production, more than 10,000 people called Canyon City home. As you can see by the cemetery tombstones, the lifespan for many in Canyon City was very short. Canyon City had its own celebrity, Joaquin Miller, a flamboyant character who led a vagabond life. He was known for his poetry and literature and once toured Europe. He returned to Cañon City in 1907. During his early years, he lived with Indians and once took an Indian as his wife, but later deserted her. His home remains alongside the Grant County Museum. After his death, the state named a highway after him, the Joaquin Miller Highway, an extension of Highway 395. "13 miles east of Cañon City on Highway 26 is Prairie City and the Prairie City Depot Museum. The Sumter Valley Railroad rolled into Prairie City in 1910, providing a link with the eastern goldfields in Baker City. Babs Brainerd, the museum curator, who almost single-handedly saved the depot and turned it into a museum, remembers a story about Cattle Car 2020 that sits on rails nearby. As the story goes, when not used to transport cattle, 2020 would make its way to various destinations along the route, transporting ladies of the night to the remote mining camps and towns in the Blue Mountains. Lace curtains and benches turned the cattle car into a higher class of accommodations. The story, she says, was verified by at least one old-timer in town and could probably be backed up by a number of others if they could only admit to it. Hardman is a farming community located in the rolling hills about 20 miles south of Heppner on Highway 207. The town is divided by the highway, and a few residents live here, but the town has all the ghost town qualities. In the 1870s, two towns a mile apart competed for the business of freight wagon drivers and stagecoach passengers. Some even bribed the drivers to change hotels after they had settled in for the night. The towns were Raw Dog and Yellow Dog, but it was later determined that more people lived in Raw Dog. So when a post office was established in Raw Dog, Yellow Dog gave up the fight, and the two towns were renamed Hardman by the Postal Service. Hardman is the name of one of the early settlers, and by the way, the first postmaster. The post office operated from 1882 to 1968. Many of the town's buildings have fallen from decay, but others are maintained by the few people who still live here. Located 20 miles from Condon is the community of Lone Rock, appropriately named after a huge rock on an otherwise flat valley floor. The church dates back to the turn of the century. It has been renovated over the years and today enjoys the appearance of its earlier years. Touring the inside of the church, it's easy to imagine the gatherings held here. And possibly the hymn Rock of Ages echoing frequently within its walls. Like many of Oregon's pioneer communities, it's the work of the local citizens who are bringing life back into towns that were left bleaching in the sun and succumbing to harsh winters. The Lone Rock School, once sporting a bell cupola, is being renovated. And the main street, not changed much from the early years, still has a gas pump without a station. A dance hall that is now the community center, and a jail that frequently housed drunken Indians and sheep herders. The town had settled as a crossroads gathering place for ranchers and sheep herders. It was also a supply center. It was laid out in 1881 by two ranchers, R.G. Robinson and Albert Henshaw. Robinson was also the mail carrier, bringing in the mail from the Dalles on horseback or buckboard. The cemetery sits on a hill about a mile from town. Its stone markers revealing some of Lone Rock's earlier years. Ortley was the brainchild of a group of businessmen in Hood River. They wanted to create a European-type community for the purpose of raising apples and distributing them worldwide. A grand idea, it seemed. About 1908, they selected their site high on a plateau on the eastern side of the Cascades, with commanding views of the Columbia River. The area today is accessible off Highway 30 near the Dalles. The developers selected fairly level fields, divided the lots for 1-acre home sites, plus 5 and 10-acre plots for apple orchards. They were going to get rich on Ortley apples. They built homes, only a few at first, stores and a hotel for entertaining prospective landowners, and a schoolhouse. The developers spent $200,000 on the project, and small apple trees lined the countryside. But that was the beginning of the end for Ortley. Many trees died from lack of water in summer and too much of it in winter. What should have been an early clue soon became a reality. The settlers never questioned why fir trees along the bluffs only had branches on one side, until the same thing happened to their apple trees. The strong prevailing winds would take its toll, and the settlers slowly abandoned the community and their contracts with developers. Orchards do exist on the high plateau, but not of the Ortley apple variety, with some dating back to 1866. On Highway 97, about 50 miles south of the Columbia River, Shaniko has changed from much of a ghost town to a popular tourist attraction. At the turn of the 19th century, Central Oregon was one huge sheep ranch. and that was the main reason for the creation of Shanico. Thousands of bales of fleece were shipped out of here to the Dalles, the closest point for export. A group of bankers and businessmen from the Dalles helped plan the community, first named Cross Hollows. The Columbia Southern Railroad had a terminal here, an important link to market for the wool growers. The station was operated by a German immigrant named August Schornakow, who spoke in broken English and also had a hard time communicating with the Indians. They never could pronounce his name correctly, so Schornakow became Shanico, with the first post office established in 1879. The schoolhouse used for grades K through high school has been renovated. It had a wood-burning stove in every room. The general store, city hall, and jail are still standing, although worn a bit from a century of weather. Shanico had a good water supply, and they made good use of it with an impressive gravity flow water tower that stands just a few blocks from the center of town. The chapel still gets plenty of use, with several hundred weddings a year performed here. A lot of Shanico's past still remains. Rusting vehicles, horse-drawn wagons, and a livery stable full of relics from early years. Oregon's pioneer jails were not very comfortable accommodations, and so it was with Shanico's 3-cell lockup. And to be sure none of Shanico's unwanted ghostly past invades the present community lifestyle, one shop owner has taken on the self-appointed task of keeping Shanico ghost-free. Just 25 minutes from Portland or Salem off I-5 is the historic community of Aurora. Not a ghost town, but a town that has much to offer given its history and early unique lifestyle. Named after the daughter of its founder, Wilhelm Keil, the town was the haven for the religious group Keil founded in Missouri in 1845. Facing many difficulties during their 10-year existence in Bethel, Missouri, Keil decided to head west and picked a handful of followers to set out on the Oregon Trail, arriving in the Oregon Territory in late 1855. Keil ruled his followers with religious zeal, and the newly formed colony prospered. In 1862, Keil allowed a follower to help a neighbor outside the colony who was stricken with smallpox. Unfortunately, the follower brought the disease back into the colony with him, resulting in the death of several residents, including Keil's 14-year-old daughter, Aurora. During a 7-year period from 1863 to 1870, most of Aurora's principal buildings were constructed, including the Aurora Colony Hotel. Its dining room became famous throughout the state. It was a popular place for weekend stays and meal stops for stagecoaches. The Aurora Colony House was constructed on the farm of Henry Snyder Jr. on the outskirts of town. It was restored and is used today during the annual Aurora Colony Days during the second week in August. Volunteers dress up in period clothing and demonstrate trades that help make the colony prosper. Aurora had numerous musicians and formed bands playing at all gatherings and celebrations. The colony church was completed in 1867, its steeple 114 feet high, with platforms from which the colony band sometimes played. Hops were an important crop at Aurora, and still is today. Many of the early settlers' homes have been restored, housing antique and specialty shops. The extensive museum complex harbors much of Aurora's past, including homes returned to their 18th century elegance. Aurora is Oregon's first National Historic District and is proudly proclaimed as the state's antique capital. In Sunny Valley, exit 71 off I-5 in southwestern Oregon, is Josephine County's last remaining covered bridge, with a history of its own. It is also the only covered bridge visible from I-5 from the Canadian to Mexican borders. In the fall of 1846, the first immigrant wagon train from Fort Hall, Idaho, to travel the southern route to the Willamette Valley, camped on the north side of the creek. 16-year-old Martha Leland Crowley died just before reaching the encampment. There were 18 in the family. 8 died before reaching Oregon. Running low on materials, boxes were knocked to pieces to make her coffin. Then cattle were corralled over her grave so Indians wouldn't find her body and dig it up. An adjacent interpretive center chronicles the journey of the pioneers who passed through here on the Applegate Trail. The bridge was built in 1920, thus the name, Grave Creek. About 3 miles east of Wolf Creek, exit 76 on I-5, and a short distance up Coyote Creek is the ghostly remains of Golden. There was gold to be found in Coyote Creek, but panning for it was very slim pickings. The few miners that started the process gave up and headed for bigger strikes in the Salmon River. The Chinese moved in and mined the area until the original white miners returned and drove them off. Using hydraulic placer mining, they were able to get a good amount of gold from the creek beds, and so the town of Golden was born. There were 2 churches, no saloons, a general store, carriage house, and post office. In 1892, more than 150 people lived here. Golden's community church looks the same today as it did more than 100 years ago. Originally built by the Campbellites, it later served as the house of worship for the Free Methodists. The town, now owned by one person, has seen some attempts at restoration over the years. Today, a trip through Golden is like a journey through time, many, many years ago. Jacksonville, west of Medford in southwest Oregon, is hardly a ghost town today, simply because of residents determined to retain the past and develop a tourist trade. In its earlier years, Jacksonville was a thriving mining town, with gold discovered on Jackson Creek in 1891. The mining operations were interrupted at times with Indian wars and a smallpox epidemic. The Civil War also divided the town. Jacksonville is constantly undergoing restoration. Many of its buildings retain their old appearance. And the first Protestant church west of the Rockies is still in use. Some of Jacksonville's buildings, unchanged from the late 1800s, are a reminder of tough times, some well fortified against bandits and Indians. The Orth Building had a dance hall and hotel rooms. The lower floors included shops. The old courthouse has been renovated and houses a museum. The City Hall and Jail saw its last prisoners, two brothers charged with holding up a train. One of the most fascinating attractions is the Jacksonville Cemetery, submerged in a dense grove of cypress and madrona trees. Lavish burial sites are scattered throughout the cemetery, which also includes special sections for different races, ethnic and fraternal organizations. It also includes a section for paupers, whose graves were finally recognized a few years ago. There are two Kernvilles, the old and new, and they're easy to get to just off the Coast Highway south of Lincoln City on the Siletz River. Daniel Kern, the town's founder, and his brother John built a fish cannery on the north bank of the river. It was the first white settlement in North Lincoln County. A sawmill was built on the south side of the river, turning out coastal spruce, a needed commodity for building airplanes during World War I. There was no real dependable roads to Kernville. Roads were impassable when it rained, and the depth of the Siletz Bar was only 7 feet. A drawbridge was built on the Siletz in 1926, and this spelled the end for Old Kernville. Residents moved to New Kernville alongside the present highway. Just upriver from Old Kernville is another historic spot called Coyote Rock. The site is named after an Indian called Coyote, who they say loved migrating salmon, so much so that he would dam up the river at the narrow passage formed by a huge boulder. The site today continues to be a good spot to camp and fish, but anglers use more conventional and legal methods to land their catch. Not far from Toledo and the Aquinnah River, upstream from Newport, is Chitwood. The first settlers arrived here in the 1860s, but it wasn't until 1887 when a school was built. To say the least, Chitwood was a slow developing community. No gold in Chitwood, just some sandstone for construction of buildings and breakwaters. The town prospered for a short while as a stopping point of the Corvallis and Eastern Railroad, later the Southern Pacific. the road to the coast was rerouted and paved, and the fate of Chitwood was sealed. Today, the covered bridge is the town's biggest attraction. The beautifully restored structure is 96 feet long and was built in the early 20s, another of Oregon's historic beauty. On the Aquinnah River, a short distance from Chitwood, is Elk City. Elk City became the terminus for steamboat traffic originating in towns near the Aquinnah Bay. It was a logging community, and while there was plenty of timber to harvest, Elk City prospered. The store is the main business in town and becomes even busier when the fish are biting. It said one year the water was so high that it took a pile of lumber and slammed it into the side of the hotel, so bad it had to be torn down. The water also took its toll on the mill and was never rebuilt. Probably the only thing that hasn't changed. It's a good fishing hole. The dream was a playground for millionaires, another Atlantic City, the most modern community on the Oregon coast. It was called Bay Ocean. Located between the Pacific Ocean and Tillamook, nothing remains to give us a hint of this once lavish development. An historic sign marks the spot with a brief history. The T.B. Potter Realty Company from Kansas City began the development in 1907. 3 miles of paved streets and a grand hotel, the largest indoor natatorium on the West Coast, was built at a staggering cost of $50,000. But Bay Ocean began to see trouble. After Potter's death, Bay Ocean went into receivership and was revived after a group of Tillamook businessmen took over the project. A road from Tillamook to Bay Ocean was opened in 1928, but Bay Ocean was already doomed. Changing ocean currents washed away the road and stranded the homes, and portions of the natatorium washed into the sea. The remaining homes also succumbed to ocean tides, and by 1952 the community completely vanished into the sea. High above the scenic stretch of beach that once was Bay Ocean stands the Cape Mears Light, a sentinel for ships at sea, and now one of the area's biggest tourist attractions. Oregon Ghost Towns. like many in the western United States, are becoming fading memories of a long time ago. Some are seeing new life with restoration and attempts to capture the heritage of early settlers and pioneers. All of the towns and historic places in this video are easily accessible by two-wheel drive and recreational vehicles. There are many more in Oregon for the adventurous to discover. However, while visiting some of the towns that are in the process of decay, it is important to remind the visitor to respect these sites and leave with only memories and snapshots. There are many museums along the route to ghost towns that offer an even bigger insight into the life and times of early Oregonians. It has been said that it is difficult to know where you are headed unless you remember where you have been. Thank you for traveling with us through Oregon Ghost Towns, a journey through time.